So I might just warn everyone up front that probably I should have done before I put that video up that this is all about moulage. So there are a couple of graphic images, but I think, given we're all simulation educators, I think it shouldn't be too far outside of anyone's comfort zone. So the title of this presentation, Investigating the Extent Highly Realistic Moulage Impacts on Learning Outcomes in Simulation-Based Learning Environments. So big thanks to the WA Clinical Training Network for giving us the money to go ahead and do this one, and all the partners that helped out with this study are listed on there as well, but we'll launch straight into it. So we operated on this definition of moulage, the art of applying mock injuries for the purpose of training emergency response teams and other medical and military personnel. So I mean, I'm sure we're all pretty well versed here in this room about all the different ways that we can utilise moulage in simulation. These are just some examples of, blunt trauma and how they can work on, live patients live actors patients, mannequins, burns, very common throughout the literature. There's a lot of literature that discusses the ways in which people are utilising moulage for burns. But just getting pretty much straight into our research question, costs money, moulage, takes a lot of time to implement this sort of stuff. So really, is it worth applying moulage for undergraduate students in their simulation-based learning scenarios? Our hypothesis was probably no. Too much cognitive burden, too much going on with the moulage. So yeah, we figured that they'd kind of crash and burn, being overloaded by all this stuff that was going on. So our method randomised our paramed students into a moulage and no moulage condition. I'm hoping these videos will work. Yeah, there we go. So you can see we had our parameds or our participants come in with a GoPro attached to the side of their head, which gives you really great first-person POV footage. You can see on the left, they've got the blood that's coming out. It's actually coming out from a pump. We had Nola Pearce and her team from Trauma Sim come out that did a really, really fantastic job. They were operating the pump from behind a two-way mirror, so they could kind of gauge in the scenario. They felt that, all right, it's time to stop the bleeding because they're applying adequate pressure. They've all done all the right things. Or if they're not, that would just keep on spurting out. As opposed to the one on the right, you can see there, typically, a lot lower fidelity. All we did was get a little sticker and colour it in red, and it was left up to the patient actor and the confederate that you can see there to kind of describe what was going on. More typical of your basic classroom type scenarios. You may have noticed that on the left, it really spurned this actual participant on to get moving a bit quicker, apply that bandage quicker. That was something else that we found in the results that I'll be talking about a bit later. But yeah, the scenario, as I mentioned before, stabbing on a train platform, one in the leg, which was the primary wound, that had a lot more going on, and then the one in the lower abdomen, which was almost like the secondary wound. And as I mentioned before, so we were really keen on isolating our independent variable of interest, which was moulage. So across all the other conditions, we standardised as much as we could. So we had a confederate who was one of our paramedic, was from the paramedic team. They were operating as a second to the student. The student was in charge of the scenario, but they were competent in what they could do. So the student could ask them to do something and they would do it competently, but in no way did they give advice, say, why don't you do this? It was really, the student was left alone to stand on their 2 feet. As I also mentioned before, just done in an empty room, not much else going on in the way of environmental surrounding fidelity, just like that. Clinical scenario was the exact same between both conditions. The equipment and all that sort of stuff that they had within their grasp, exactly the same. So really, really all we were doing was just isolating and focusing on that variable of what is the difference with the addition or the removal of moulage. So moving in through to our results, the first one of interest is we got them to fill out a NASA task load index survey, which was developed by NASA, which is one of the reasons I like using it because it sounds pretty cool. But it all talks about task load and that situation that you were just in, how difficult did you find that? And it comes across on a series of measures. So the one that came through that was provided a statistically significant difference was this one here, the temporal demand. The actual question item itself is how hurried or rushed did you feel the pace of the task was? So in the moulage condition, they really, really did feel like they were a lot more rushed, which kind of speaks to the immersion of the scenario. They really felt like they needed to act now as opposed to in the low fidelity where, you know, that it was more just back to their classroom setting where they, you know, put pressure on and could just go through it a lot quicker. So, you know, it really got them moving, and they felt like they didn't have as much time when the moulage was included. The next one speaks to kind of how they performed. We took those videos and farmed them out to a couple of sessional paramedic staff members. They watched all of the videos separately, graded them on this checklist. That's just the first 5 items. It's 22 items long, and gave them a score of meets expectations or doesn't, for which they got a 1 or a 0, and then we could calculate that to give them a score out of 22 for the scenario. And you know, this checklist was keeping in mind the competencies that are listed in the Council of Ambulance Authorities competency checklist. 2 minutes, cool. And here's the performance. So again, kind of in line with our hypothesis, was that the no moulage conditions, while they were working and operating a lot quicker in the moulage conditions, it actually did make their performance suffer. So the guys without the addition of moulage did actually, their performance you know, was better than the guys in the moulage condition. Again, not surprising. So, and it does go towards contributing towards our hypothesis that, you know, that it did kind of overload them a little bit. I'll get onto why that's not such a bad thing in a bit. But we also interviewed them afterwards. Half of the participants, not all of them. 50 interviews is a lot, so we ran a sample of 25. And these are some of the sorts of stuff that the moulage group were talking about. It provided a visual cue that aided in decision making. I was able to walk in and just immediately see what the problem was. It was great not having to sit there and wait for an explanation of what was going down. You just saw what you needed to do and you went and did it. Another aspect of the interviews that we found out was that the moulage served as a constant reminder of the severity of the condition. So you can kind of gather that, you know, these people, they've got spurting blood coming out. They're continually conscious of that, as opposed to the other guys. We noticed that they'd kind of come in, pressure on the wound, well, that's done, I don't need to worry about that anymore, what else have we got going on? Whereas these guys were continually, you know, so just increasing that realism. You know, it's easy to see things rather than say something's wrong right there, but you can't see it. Those cues continuously remind you that there is something there rather than having to remember back what was told to you earlier and then forgetting. Just make sure you go and check it. And the last one, facilitated greater immersion or buy-in. Again, not surprising, that's the whole high fidelity, low fidelity argument. And it spurred students to treat patients quicker. I'll just read the top one. It was just that first impression, that quick 10 seconds, look at your patient, are they okay or are they not okay? Straight away, he's not okay, so in they rushed. So just in conclusions, our hypothesis were they supported mostly performance scores indicated tasks more difficult with addition to moulage. However, that was just their performance, not really their contribution to what they learnt, because there's different aspects going on there. So what the moulage did aid in was task immersion. It spurred them to perform quicker, and it actually, subjective measures only. We've got another couple of other objective measures that we're playing around at the moment, particularly with eye tracking and heart rate and this sort of stuff that we haven't been able to process fully yet. But from their point of view, it aided in their clinical decision making. I want to say really quickly as well that we're presenting at the Australasian Simulation Congress as well in Melbourne. And while we haven't got it completely written up yet, we've got the publication about 3/4 of the way there to go into simulation in healthcare. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan, that was great. Just for clarity, was the timeliness about the students' perception, or did you actually measure the rate at which they performed the task?
Both. So, and again, limited time, so I didn't want to go into everything, but we have looked at that, about the time it took them to complete the scenario. It's not always a clear-cut measure, because if someone might finish the scenario quicker, that might be because they did it quicker, or they just didn't do as much and didn't do it as well. So we're kind of working our way through that at the moment. Preliminary results are suggesting that, yeah, even we're kind of isolating the ones that just did do the scenario well. Of the people that did the scenario well, were the guys doing it in moulage quicker than those that weren't? Preliminary results suggest that, yeah, they were. And that will come out in the paper. That's something that we're because that is taking a lot of time to sift through and do all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that when the paper comes out, I'd be very surprised if that result wasn't included in there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you a question, Brennan? Agencies and the military use moulage for another reason, that is so that performance won't be impaired by the practitioner, so that when the military guy goes and sees an amputated leg for the first time in the field, he won't be overwhelmed by how horrible it is and the fact that people are trying to kill him and other factors like that. So the assumption is that they've learned the task before they get into the moulaged area. So these students have already learned or mastered stopping hemorrhage before the exposure to this.
So I'd say basic mastery. I wouldn't say absolute mastery. They've definitely been exposed to it, and they've done a whole unit on trauma that was before this. So but again, they're undergraduate students in general. But for this, this would kind of tell me that simulation and getting them to do something like this prior them to being exposed to this the first time out there, we saw that performance suffer. Yes. So that to me kind of says, that they need to be doing this sort of stuff before they get out there. Along those lines with the military and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.